Ground is aground, the world around. So here's the setup in the 2008 Ranger. Here's the battery, of course. This I already loosened. This is the fuse box, and these two bolts go right here. So you remove those two bolts, pull it out, and stretch the cabling so you can get it out. Now, see if the lighting's good enough here. The wiring harness on the truck goes right through the firewall underneath that fuse box. And there's the wire coming up right down there. This whole block here, if you go inside the cab and underneath the steering wheel, there's some plastic clips in there which you kind of just push with the screwdriver, and this whole thing pulls out, this whole rubber piece. I then drilled a hole in it and pushed this wire through, which is the wire I used in my old truck. Now this end of the wire, I have two inline fuses which I bought and crimped on some connectors which I'm going to bolt on either directly to the battery or to the fuse box, so I can get positive and negative in the cab. So you can see I've pulled it through, pulled that cable through, and there's the two connectors which I'll eventually hook up to a distribution bus, which I'll show later. Now this cable is very interesting. I got this at the marine store. I believe it's number 6, and it comes with a red and a black wire. I believe these days it would be red and yellow. They changed the codes, but it's got a sheath of this really tough stuff. So it's kind of like a special power cable used in marine situations, which makes it a little bit tougher going through the firewall and whatnot and running around under rugs. You don't want it to abrade and short out. If I remember correctly, it was about $1.60, $1.75 a foot. It's not cheap, but it's well worth it. One thing you want to do when you're setting these up here, these are the inline connectors. You open it up and pull your fuses out till you're finished. You pull them out and you won't have to worry about hooking it up and shorting the wires. It's two 30-amp fuses I'm using. The fuses look like that. They're just common automotive blade fuses. So now when I hook this up, I won't have to worry about the two wires in the cab shorting out and making smoke. So I've got the fuse box back in. I'll just tighten the screws. They weren't real tight when I took it. And on the 2008 Ranger, you pull right here, and this cover on the fuse box comes off. And that's all your fuses for the truck. But where I want to connect, let's see if I can get this off without breaking my fingernails. You pull that off, and here's where you trace the line here. That's a positive line that ends up coming through here to the positive on the battery. There's 2 bolts there. I only took one out so that I wouldn't have to reset my car computer. Okay, here's the fuse box. I've got the cover over the positive bolts, and these are the inline fuses, and I've got the negative bolted to the chassis way underneath there. Well, that's it then. The fuses that I pulled out of the inline fuse holders, I'm going to store right there. And I'm putting this on the video, so if I forget, I'll remember when I look at the video. Anyway, and that just clips on over. I guess next I got to figure out how to actually wire the inside of the cab. When you're doing a new install, you often run into the unexpected. I mean, if I looked at the manual or diagrams, maybe I would have found it, but I just went ahead and removed the screws thinking it would be easy. So there it is, central console. Here's the steering wheel over here. And coming down, they had this kind of neat tray. And I thought, well, I remove it and I'll have room to remove this tray. Maybe I can mount the radio there. Well, that is where it mounted, and that, I believe, is the truck's computer. I didn't know it was there, and I hope that putting a high-powered 100-watt radio next to it won't interfere with anything. So adds a little mystery to everything. This was held up in place by 3 sheet metal screws with a 7mm head. I was very happy to see that Ford had two threaded holes going into the, I guess there's a frame behind the dashboard. It's a metal frame, and they're 6mm. I checked them. Here's a 6mm screw that'll bolt in there. So that gives me a good start for a mount, and I haven't quite figured it out. On that panel, this was the auxiliary audio in to the truck's radio up here. So you can plug in a cell phone. And this right here has a nice little mount, so the whole thing comes away. This kind of pops out, and once you pop that out, you can pop the front piece out, and then they can be reassembled. I'm inside the cab. That's how I mount the radio. That's how I have mounted the radio. I did it in a similar way in my 94, and this is my 2008 Ranger, but the radio was the other way around. And I ran into a little problem here. Let me show you how the radio comes off. It's a single bolt mount right here, and I have a nut that I put on it when I'm driving, but I just want to show you pulling it off. And that's the way the radio mounts. Now the problem was, and I don't know how it's going to work, but that's the truck's computer right there. So I couldn't get clearance for all the wires that come out the back of the radio. That's your HF, and that's for your VHF and UHF. And there's your power cord. And couldn't get clearance coming out the back on that, so I turned it around. All that goes on the front is that little connector there, which goes to the console where the radio controls are, which I mount up here so I can reach it while I'm driving. Okay, now this bar here I used in my 94. It's the same bar. Had to machine it a little bit to make it fit on the bottom. And on the 94, I had to hang it using 2 brackets like this, which fixed on the top, and bolted into 2 sheet metal screws, which were in the where the ashtray mounted. So this truck, I didn't have an ashtray, changing times, but it did in the back here. There's a U-shaped piece of steel back here at the bottom of the dash panel, or whatever it is, and with 2 6mm tapped holes in it. So that's 2 6mm bolts holding it up very nicely against a solid piece of metal that runs all the way behind the dashboard. And then the radio just kind of like very nicely fits on it. And once it's up there and pulled tight, it doesn't move sideways at all. So I single bolt and put this on to hold it tight. Now there's a lot of advantages to having the gear sticking out the back here. It makes it easier to get on and off for antennas and That connector right there is if I want to hook a computer up to my radio to do telecommunications. I can do it easy. And the power cord right here is easy to access. This is pretty much the same wiring harness I had in my old 94 Ranger, and I'm going to reuse it. I use a commercial rig runner, I guess outlet strip. I use Powerpole connectors, which are really a great connector for using 12 volt, way better than ever trying to use the cigarette lighter plugs, which are just really clumsy and dumb. They're not too expensive and they're fairly easy to put on, and they handle, you can get them in I believe 45 amps in this size, which is pretty incredible. If you want to get a bunch of positive and negative two wire devices, but what I did, and I've done this before, is I took a piece of copper, which I used my Whitney punch to punch a hole in the copper right about there, and then use my Vice snips to snap so you can make a place for the rib, and then use the Whitney punch to punch the holes to put the thing in, and then you see I bend the copper down. So this will be both of these, all these 4 pins here will have the negative, and all these 4, I should say, screws will have positive. Positive on this side and the negative on that side, so there's no chance that something will come in there and short it out. Now this is homemade piece of plastic. I don't know, I think I cut it out of a rain barrel or something like that, forget where I got it. But then a piece of wood where I routed a little groove in it there, and this piece of plastic turns over the top, fits in the groove, and then when you tighten the screw down, it holds this in place, and nothing will short those wires out. Well, this took a few hours, but I've decided to mount this board on the truck's, I guess you call it the transmission hump. And this is the Powerpole distribution box, and this is my home-built terminal with its shield, and the radio and central console. Under the dashboard, and then coming straight down, truck's computer. Here is the from the battery comes to my terminal strip. This goes over the top of it when you push that bolt down. You twist that bolt down. It doesn't twist out of the way, so it protects the terminal strip. I've got a wire running out of there, which is kind of sloppy, over to the Powerpole distribution point, and it's fused separately. Here is fused at the other end near the battery. And then my radio, well, it's just like so, and then you plug it in. But that's pretty much the setup for getting power into the cab and the radio. And now I guess I'm going to concentrate on getting the antennas in. Maybe I should power it up and give it a smoke test first. Well, I found the fuses right in there where I left them. Put them in the inline fuse holders, I guess negative first, positive. No smoke so far, hopefully. Checking the cabin. Well, that's strange. Only getting 7 point something volts. Okay, I got 12 volts plus a little bit in the cabin now, and I'll show you what the problem was and what I did to remedy the problem. I was quite happy. This right here, connected to the fuse box, gave me a, I tested it right here and did all the tests. That's 12 volts nicely. But this ground that I used, it only gave me 8 volts in the cabin. And when I tested the voltage in the cabin against the ground in the cabin, I got 12. So I knew it was the ground. So what I've done is I resorted to my old method, which I used in my 94 Ranger. Here it's a little easier to implement. I bolted it right to the battery terminal bolts, positive and negative. And there's all my fuses. It's kind of a little ugly, and you gotta deal with it when you change the battery or do anything up here. But that gives me really nice connection in the cabin. So I'll work on that other ground and move it eventually, but this is how I'm going to go for this field day, directly to the battery. There's even more excitement in part 3.